Hey, welcome to another episode of the Diary of an Apartment Investor podcast. I'm your host, Brian Briscoe. My investing company is Streamline Capital Group. I probably don't say that enough here. And I'm also the founder of the Tribe of Titans multifamily educational community. And today I want to talk about something that it took me a long time to realize. And that's about those markets that a lot of people look at and say, they're too expensive for me. And there's something to be said about that. But when I, rewind the clock 5 years ago, when I started my multifamily journey, it was 2018. I went and looked at a couple of properties, had no idea what I was doing. Started calling brokers and, getting these offering memorandums that I had no idea even how to look at. And I ended up choosing markets to invest in almost based off of what apartments cost per door, which is probably a backwards way of doing it, if that makes sense. I remember specifically, I looked at a property in downtown Salt Lake City. And I was born and raised just north of Salt Lake. I went to school at University of Utah, and the university is, a couple of blocks outside of downtown. And so, this property I looked at, remember it was a C class. It needed some value add. It was old, but it was a perfect location. As a matter of fact, I used to drive by it every day, but the broker said it was going to go for about 125, 130,000 a door. And I was thinking, oh my gosh, this is ridiculously expensive. And I went towards a market where we could still buy things at $30,000 to $40,000 a door. I think a lot of places have appreciated since then. And, things that we were buying at $30,000 to $40,000 a door 5 years ago or 4 years ago are now selling in the 60s to 80s. But the same thing happened in Salt Lake City. I looked at an OM recently for another property in downtown Salt Lake, and instead of 125, 130 a door, it was 300 a door. And that was the whisper price on it. I'm scratching my head thinking, oh my gosh, 300,000 a door. But here's something about the cities that seem to be expensive. And when I tell everybody, I've mentioned this before, when I tell everybody I'm looking at Salt Lake City, so many people say, wow, that's an expensive market to be in. But why are markets expensive? If you believe in the supply and demand, I mean, there's obviously some supply and demand there, but for a market to be expensive for investors, there has to be something there. There has to be something that investors see there that attracts them to these particular markets. It might be they're experiencing a lot of economic growth and they expect to experience a lot of economic growth. There could be other drivers there, population influx, which usually goes hand in hand with economic growth. Sometimes it's state policies, or they may have a pro-growth policy that's incentivizing people to move there that creates the economic growth. Maybe they have a lot of human capital, a lot of talent there. Cities with a lot of universities tend to do that. They have a lot of people graduating the universities, and a lot of companies take advantage of these factories, so to speak, that just churn out talent day in and day out. But there's a lot of drivers there that make these markets what they are, that make these markets expensive. And, part of it is supply and demand of housing, first of all. But the other part is investing. People want to invest in these cities. And I'm talking cities like San Francisco and in New York City, Washington, D.C. They're ridiculously expensive. And then you go next tier down, maybe you have your Austins and your Salt Lake Cities. Why would you want to invest in a place like that? I mean, when you start looking at the numbers, you can't get a 75% loan to value product. You can't get debt at that rate and cash flow. So why would you want to invest in a city like that? If you want a cash flow on a property, you've got to get a loan at around 60% to make that property cash flow. And the answer goes back to the dynamics. What is it that is making that city expensive? All right, what is it that is making that city a place where people want to live and people want to invest? All right, because it's the money that's going in, it's a supply and demand. There's such a demand for housing, there's such a demand for the investment properties that the prices go up. Okay, what is creating that demand? And here's what I've realized is, a lot of these areas have dynamics that are going to continue to create demand for the immediate future, for the next 3, 5, 10 years. it's something that, whether it's in the culture, in the blood, whatever it is, they continue to create demand. New York City is the financial center, and it's always going to have tenants. It's always going to have people who want to move there. Washington, D.C. is, nation's capital. There's always going to be people who want to move and live there because it's the seat of government. On the West Coast, San Francisco is a financial center. You got Austin, that's a tech hub, and all these cities that have something special about them that attract capital, attract people. And that's what make these cities a great place to invest. Now, when you look at numbers, it's even better when you start looking at numbers. Yeah, you're going to have to assume, higher than the national average in growth to make your pro formas work. But these areas have consistently experienced that in a lot of cases. But when you look at numbers, if you buy something at a 3 cap versus a 6 cap, and really quickly, if you know how to value properties or pin a value on them, you take the income minus expenses, that's your net operating income, and you divide it by a cap rate. And that gives you an approximate value, or it's one method of getting a value on the property. So if you have a cap rate at 3% and a cap rate at 6%, if you create $100 or $1,000 or $10,000 extra in net operating income per year, and you divide it by a 3 cap versus a 6 cap, you are dollar for dollar going to make twice as much money on a value add on a 3 cap property than you're going to make on a 6 cap property. All right. Don't believe me? Pull out your calculator and check it out. All right. So when you start looking at these markets, competition can be a good thing. Markets that are highly competitive are such because there is something about that market that makes it a good place for people to live and for investors to invest. So as you're looking for markets to invest in, don't just overlook markets that are ridiculously expensive. I did, and I wish I hadn't. I overlooked Salt Lake City, the place where I grew up, I was a resident of Salt Lake City for, the first 45 years of my life, and I live in Idaho now. But don't overlook the expensive markets just because they're expensive. Dig a little bit deeper and find out what's going on in those markets, what makes them expensive, and can we figure out how to make things work in those markets? That's it for today. And I think coming up, I might just do an exclusive on Salt Lake because I love it so much. But that's it for today, and we'll talk to you soon.
Hey, if you like that episode, make sure to subscribe. But more importantly, if you haven't joined our multifamily educational community yet, which we call the Tribe of Titans, you are missing out. Get 30 days free by clicking the link in the description to this episode, or go to thetribeoftitans.info, and we'll see you there.